Between two dumbbells is for educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered medical, fitness, or nutritional advice.
You're between two dumbbells. I'm your host, Skip Hill, OG bodybuilder / prep guy, and I'm here today, as usual, with Dr. Marv. How you doing, Dr. Marv?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Not too bad. It's Monday. So it's hectic. I'm sure it's chaotic. It is what it is. But this is our time to get together to discuss, debate, argue, smash or pass, agree, not agree. I'm hoping you don't agree with me. I secretly like when you don't agree with me. Because I think the listeners, that's the basis of, I think, why we want to do this. It's a situation where I don't want to pat each other on the back and say, oh my God, you're so smart. Mm-hmm. So tell me I'm dumb. Tell me just, you know what? You've been doing this a long time, Skip, 40 years? And that's what you think? You have to be kidding me. Yeah. And then I'll slither away and I'll come back for the next show. I don't want to say topic. I try not to say topic, but it is a topic. Yeah. But I posit this, Dr. Marv. I think that the dumbbell pullover is highly underrated, grossly underrated for back width. And I'm going to add a little caveat. I say back width because one of the pet peeves that I have with bodybuilding and the semantics is lat width is a bit of a misnomer. But I don't want to go in too many different directions. I'm going to keep the carriage in the wake of the mare. That's a Moira-ism from Schitt's Creek. Oh, I love her. She's the god in that show. Anyway, keeping the carriage in the wake of the mare. Width, dumbbell pullover. What do you think?
So I was planning to strongly disagree with you until you clarified that it's not lat width that it does.
Okay, all right.
Because I think a lot of people still claim dumbbell pullovers are a lat movement. And the short story is it really isn't. Right. It is more, if people just want to fast forward straight ahead, it's more of a teres major dominant movement, which will help with lat thick or back seat. I made the mistake.
Yeah, right.
Back width as well. So this is one of those times there where all the evidence-based, what are the EMG studies? Remember we talked about last time, EMG studies have a lot of limitations, but they give you a little bit of idea, right? But what's most important is how much of the range of motion is the muscle being loaded. You know, that's the biggest thing, how much tension you're putting on it, not just peak electrical activity measured on the surface with pads. But there's not been a lot of really well done research on a dumbbell pullover. And and I'll explain why. First and foremost, most of the research is not cross-body. So I don't know how you feel about, are you doing cross-body with your hips drop down or are you laying across the bench? Before you answer, all I will say is what I saw, all the studies are not cross-body. They're laying with your body on the bench like you would do like a chest press, like a flat bench. So what are you specifically referring to?
The latter.
Okay.
When you're lying down and your body is essentially lying on the length of the bench, so to speak, not cross bench, which is kind of an old school. That's how they were always done back in the day. Matter of fact, I don't think when I was younger, I don't think I saw anyone do a pullover any other way than across the bench. Not a fan of the cross bench. And the main reason is just because the hips being below, and again, this is going to be one of those things you can correct me if I'm wrong. The hips being below the shoulders is a concern of mine. I understand that, and people need to understand that the dumbbell pullover, the most important part of the range of motion essentially is the stretch position. You'll get more of a stretch with the hips below the shoulders. But I just think it's a really bad position to be in. It's not in my opinion, a mechanically correct position. And you can still get that stretch, a very good stretch, without as much of risk when you're lying the length of the bench. Obviously, you need to be positioned well so that your head, basically your shoulders are at the top of much like I'm sitting in the chair right here. You don't want your head, I don't want my head, I guess, against the bench. I want it to be able to hang so that when I do, there's no range of motion issue there. Plus, you don't want that dumbbell to hit behind you, which is another thing, because there's a lot of nuance to the mechanics. Should the arms be bent at the elbow? If so, how much? Does it turn into I think what's called a PJR, a pullover, which I'm not a big fan
I'm a
of.
huge fan of those.
All right, well, then there.
Probably my favorite long head movement ever.
Well, funny you say that, though. Long head. So we'll have to talk about the long head of the tricep versus the movement at the scapula and how they're connected and that sort of thing. But lengthwise has always been my go-to. Now, I will add this. I also like a slight decline as well, because I think that can also limit that risk or that vulnerability to the shoulder too. But I think it's a movement that is incredibly underrated. And and the reason I say that is because I have very, very narrow clavicles myself. I have to fight more than most to add size to my shoulders and my back, because I don't have those awesome scapula that I'm so jealous of my wife for, because she can be at the top of a lat pull or a chin and her scapula come out real wide, and she doesn't have great back development. It's not bad, but it's not great. Arguably, I have much better back development, but I don't look very good hanging from a chin bar or hanging from that lat pull when I have a V, when I want these wings to come out, at the top. So let's dive in. What do you think then, as far as, let's compare, for the sake of conversation, the dumbbell pullover versus, say, a chin, which is notoriously known as a width movement. And by the way, I do want to add that I don't like the discussion of width versus thickness, and we're
going to put a pin in that. We're going to get in that. Yeah. So let's break down the movement. So there's a couple things. One, doing on a decline bench has not been studied with EMG, but that probably would actually allow you to hit the lat maybe a little bit more. But according to the limited EMG studies we have, it's primarily a pec and tricep movement first. I had a hard time finding a study where they put pads on the teres major, so nobody's really directly monitored teres major EMG studies with a pullover. So we would speculate, based on biomechanics, in an overhead position to extend the shoulder, so get out of the stretch, the teres would have the major mechanical advantage, right? The lat's not doing a heck of a lot, so we found that it's probably pec major, triceps, especially the long head, teres primarily, maybe a little bit of lat. The issue I have, and we'll put a pin in this, come back to it, is if you're using free weights and gravity, there's not a lot of tension in that bottom position, right? So we do, and this is my interpretation, right? So people, you could say I'm wrong, that's fine, but it believes like from straight overhead to about 90 degrees is primarily pec, especially if you kind of flare your elbows. From at 90 degrees, dumbbells right in front of you, it is probably a combination of pec and lat. And then as you get down, in theory, it would be lat. But if you're doing a dumbbell without a band, like John Meadows style, which I have a video we could show up, there's not a lot of tension there. So I would much rather prefer a cable variation of a pullover for the better loading profile to actually get more back. But yeah, you're probably hitting teres, which I think is super underrated and not well respected. People think it's a small muscle. A teres major could be as thick as your bicep, and that's what gives you that biggest sense of width on a bodybuilding stage. It's not the lat, because the lats are pretty paper thin for the most part.
Right.
The teres could be thick, and that's what also, that gives you width and thickness, right? And we'll talk about that in a sec, to where that combined really helps. So I would much rather prefer to do a pullover motion with a cable, or because like the dumbbell banded is great, but it's such a pain in the ass to set up.
It is.
I'm going to be honest, I don't do it a ton, but I do like a cable pullover, and I will show how I do it, which might be different. I had a rocking motion to emphasize the entire range of motion, which we'll show in a second. But yeah, I think for the most part, we do believe it's teres major, chest, and triceps being the biggest movers, not your lats.
Just an odd, curious question, I guess. But why then? What was their focus for the EMG? Was it specifically lat? Like, why would there not be any EMG study? I mean, the function of the lat doesn't even really fit with the movement.
Correct.
So
yeah. So that's some of the issues. I know at some point, what's his name? Coach Kasim, I think that's how you say it, of N1. He was doing some.
Maybe it's
yeah,
wrong.
I hope it's right. If I said it wrong, I apologize. No disrespect. I believe he was playing around with some EMG stuff after looking at the research of not really anybody monitoring Terry's major. What was wild was, we typically do it with a dumbbell, right? But it was originally done with a barbell where guys were loading up 400 pounds. And then it's really used with a barbell in track and field. And they will either do kipping versions with like double their body weight or more, which just blows my mind. Like my shoulders ripped off out of the socket simply watching it, or they'll do a version where they're literally just rebounding it. So they're down on the bench, so their hand hits the bench and it rebounds up with a super heavy load. Yeah. So it's interesting that track and field uses it honestly more than bodybuilders these days, I feel like.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Is it just me, or does the term kipping in front, just as soon as you say the word kipping,
eye roll?
Yeah, it doesn't matter what it is. I think I'm going to start using the term kipping for anything kind of to precede anything that I think is silly or absurd and that I don't want to be taken very seriously.
I'm good with that. Well, what's funny is,
or dangerous,
yes.
I guess.
Well, to his credit, the individual who brought kipping pull-ups to CrossFit said that was his biggest mistake. Because kipping pull-ups are job security for me, because your mobility demands are 10 times more to kip than you are to do a strict pull-up. Yeah. So without fail, at least once every 2 months, somebody comes in from a kipping pull-up injury, because I work with a lot of CrossFit boxes. Yeah. Yep. That and handstand push-ups. But anyways.
Well, add to that the CrossFit.
It did a lot of good, though. We don't throw the baby out of the bathwater. It did a lot of good.
True. Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong. But I do think that there's a combination of not only the movement itself being not terribly, just a giant risk, but then you have that demographic, in my opinion, in CrossFit that they don't typically, and I know this is a blanket statement, so I have to be very careful with this, but by and large, a lot of that demographic doesn't train consistently. They're kind of the weekend warrior thing. They go a few weeks, they don't, then they're back into it for a few weeks. And that in and out, I think that's why they see a lot of rhabdo. I don't want to go down the CrossFit rabbit hole, but I think that's why rhabdo works its way into CrossFit so much more than bodybuilders who tend to, once they're in, and we're more OCD and obsessive, if you will. Yeah. So let's do you want to kind of segue into the mechanics or proper mechanics of the exercise, and we may be able to, there might be some disagreement here.
Yeah. Let me say one thing. Think about it though. What other movement can you get both chest and some sort of back activation simultaneously?
Right.
I really don't know of one. So do you put it on a back day? Do you put it on you chain chest and back together though, right?
I do right now, which is not
okay.
I don't say it's uncommon, but it's not terribly common. Usually I do split them up. To me, it's a back movement. And you know what? Let's touch on that for a second, because I know Jay Cutler used to say, and might still today, that the pullover is a chest movement. And I'm going to be like, I'll be honest. And Jay's a great guy, and he's clearly very good at what he does, and he's very knowledgeable. It's just a difference of opinion. I'm not saying he's dumb. I'm not saying he doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't get, maybe it's because he is a lot more wider than I. Maybe clavicles, maybe there's a mechanical issue there. I don't know. But I know the way that I do them, and I'll be able to get into the details of how I perform, how I think they need to be performed correctly. The way that I do them, it's very, very minor chest. I'll feel it if I train chest the day before. I'll get a little bit of a pump. I'll be like, okay, it is a little. But if I had to put a number on it to make my point, 85, 90% to me from a feel standpoint is in the back and around the shoulder blade. It's
so here's why.
Little.
So both of you are correct. Your rib cage will dictate what muscles. So the steeper your rib cage is, the more chest it's going to be. That's why Jay, 45-degree traditional incline bench hits his upper chest. For myself, my sternum is almost damn vertical. It's embarrassing. So 45 degrees is all front delt. Chest is my lagging body part. I'm very open about that. It's next to my God's gifts of shoulders. I kept blasting that 45-degree traditional bench, And then once I learned that, now the max incline I'll do is maybe 30 degrees, but most of my incline's 15, and now it's chest. So for you and me, it's never really going to be a crazy chest movement, most likely. But for him, absolutely, with how freaking stiff and big he was, right? Like Arnold talked about expanding your ribcage with a pullover. Now, temporarily with fluid dynamics, that's why I have this ball we'll talk about when we're reviewing some other movements. It will definitely get his rib cage to expand and function then. But like Arnold had a massively, from pictures, I've never met the guy, I haven't put my hand on his sternum, but from pictures, right? Like people who have the best chest typically have this very, very, very steep sternal angle. So the rib cage and the shape and how the muscles wrap around, it gets recruited way easier than say you or me, which I'm assuming your sternum angle is relatively vertical like mine. Hence we feel it more on our back, even though research says it's probably not the greatest back builder of all time.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, fair enough. And I think that it's safe to say that the vast majority of the viewers and listeners probably have that genetic component that we do versus, a Jay Cutler.
Yeah, I don't think Jay Cutler's watching this for training tips.
You never know. You never know, right?
Yeah. That's the goal, at least.
Right. Okay, so if you don't mind, I want to dive into just a few of the, I say cues, but the things that I do when I'm doing a pullover. Number one, which I think is incredibly important, is I consider it a finisher. I want as much blood in my back as I possibly can, not only for the risk to benefit, or the ROI, if you will, but also because in my brain, I think DC stretches. That's how old I am, because I've been around forever.
Hey, I'm a big believer in them.
So there is a component where I think, okay, if I'm stretching the muscle and I'm finishing my back workout with this movement, with this very big stretch, then I should get some benefit from stretching fascia at that point as well. Here's an example. Even though I'm plenty warm at that point, when I get to my dumbbell pullovers, I still will start with a 35 or a 40 because the first couple reps don't want to go down as far and I don't want to force them. So I kind of start at maybe like a 2/3, 3/4 of the way, and then I take the next few reps and I get a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. And I think this is important to know. I do not believe and will never believe that this is an exercise that you need to force the stretch. I think that's a really bad idea. There's a stretch, find the stretch, use it, and then don't over exaggerate it or put yourself in a situation where there is potential for injury. I don't think that added inch, half inch, 3/4 of an inch of range of motion is going to be like game changer material. So I even consider it even less, a little bit less stretch and a little bit more opening things up. That's how my brain works. Even while I'm stretching, getting ready for legs, people say, "Oh, you stretch before legs." That's weird. You're supposed to stretch after when they're warm. I'm not necessarily stretching as much as I'm opening up my hips so that there's not a limited range of motion. And what I mean, to be more specific, is I'm not looking when I stretch prior to legs to increase flexibility or to increase flexibility. I'm looking to get to the flexibility that I am when I'm warm so that everything is open and just not tight. After you have, maybe you load or you have a cheat day, you're going to be a little tighter. You're holding a little more water, of course. So that stretching component will open that up. It's similar to when I do the pullovers where I want to work myself into that range. I also don't do them terribly heavy. I don't get up to maybe 60, 70, 75, maybe an 80. The big reason and the most limiting factor is I want only a slight bend in the elbow. And I look at it this way. Even though I'm extended in this beginning position with the dumbbell, as I'm coming back, my thought process is I don't want the dumbbell behind my head. I want to, my cue is almost like I'm pushing the dumbbell up above my head into the stretch. Not necessarily locking out, but so that my brain is thinking, keep that dumbbell up there with a lighter weight for a better stretch than to let it go behind my head, which allows almost anybody to use more weight, but also more tricep. You're going to use tricep even when you have a slight bend in the elbow because it's stabilized, but I don't want it to move. Now, there's arguments on both sides, don't get me wrong, but that's just the way that I approach it. It helps me to maintain or contain those weights a little bit to get the benefit, and of course, higher reps. I'm not a big fan of low reps in a risky or vulnerable position like that, or exercise like that. The only other thing I want to add is I think it's important, and this is where your brain comes in very, very handy for this as well, is you touched on this with Jay. Notice elbows flare, elbows tuck.
Yep.
I want this. Do we call it internal? At
So
that angle?
it would, sure. Yeah, we'll
I know
simplify
it's
it.
tough at that angle
Yeah.
to figure.
Yeah.
So I want him rotated. I want him in. I'm not going to force him in, but I am going to keep him from going wide because, as you stated earlier, the more those elbows get out, there is more pec involvement, arguably minor, right? Or is it major?
So yeah, it would be both.
Okay.
You can't really do EMG studies on the pec minor, right? Because it's surface. But yeah, elbows narrow, tucked in like you, will bias more of the backside structures. Elbows wider will be a little bit more of the chest structures. And when people say they get sore in their chest when they do pullovers, and they haven't done pullovers in a while, well, there is a stretch being put on the chest. So you put a novel stretch on any muscle, you will have some DOMs. Doesn't mean it was highly effective movement at growing it. Because I know a lot of people say, well, when I do pullovers, my chest gets sore the next day, which is, again, that could be absolutely factual. It doesn't mean it's a high stimulus movement. But I completely agree of reaching upwards will increase the stretch. Most people will be limited by how much their shoulder blades. So here's shoulder blades, and I have the model we'll show later of something called upward rotation. So really, it's your shoulder blade motion that'll probably limit people. And if you have to pick like a muscle structure, probably the teres, not the lat, would be the limiting overhead factor as well, because the lat still has some range of motion it could still get to.
Okay. So 2 things. Number 1, I want to ask you about rib cage position as far as maybe related to the lower back.
Yep.
Excuse me. As an example, do we want to focus on when we're trying to hit the back here? Do we want to focus on keeping that rib cage up, much like we're taught with an incline or a flat dumbbell press, or do we want the rib cage laying flatter, i.e., the lower back maybe having less of a curvature and being a little bit more flat to the bench? Thoughts on that?
I would recommend playing around with both because everybody's rib cage is going to be different. A lot of times people will report they feel more of a stretch if they're crossbody and they're dropping their hips. I don't know if it's necessarily stretching the actual upper back more, but it is tensioning something called fascia. So fascia and this is going to be the sensation of the stretch. So fascia is the covering of your muscles. It's between, muscle and skin. It's the clear film on chicken breast. We now know it has 10 times more nerve fibers than muscle. It's being considered a new organ system. And there is a line that goes from your forehead, the very top of your body, all the way down your backside to the bottom of your feet, right? That's why if you roll out the arch of your foot for 1 minute, that side hamstring will feel looser, which is really cool to do pre-workout. And then if you drop your hips, you're going to be stretching that line of fascia. So I think it gives you the sensation of a bigger, like lower lat stretch, but I don't think it's really changing the actual loading up top because you're still getting relatively the same shoulder extension, which is the whole goal,
just
right?
at a different angle.
Yeah. So I think it's the sensation of it. So is it inherently more dangerous?
It seems that it goes against the mechanic of the shoulder. That's what's in my brain. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I would say kind of like last week with behind the neck press, like what is your mobility ability? Like what is your ability to get in that position? It's going to change. Like you've already noticed, you have to warm your body up, let your brain kind of relax the muscle tissue, let the fascia get warmed up before you could get in a full stretch. So if people force a massive stretch trying to touch the damn dumbbell to the ground and everything, they don't have it. Yeah, that's asking for Snap City. Sure. So I can't give a blanket answer of one or the other with the low back because it's going to vary on your rib cage and you're going to have to do some experimenting. But I would say if you definitely want more back, do decline preferably with a band added to it for the dumbbell, or switch to a cable.
Okay. Now, and it's funny, I noticed that I didn't tell you how I did it before I asked you the question. The reason is because sometimes I do them differently. It depends on what it feels like that day.
So what's your alternate way of doing it if you're feeling stiff?
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily feeling stiff versus not. It's not something that consciously I'm going, okay, I need to do this today, but it won't feel right. let's put it this way, the vast majority of the time, let's put a number on it to make my point, 75, 80% of the time when I do a pullover, I do keep my rib cage high. High in the sense, so I have an arch in my lower back. It tends to, I can feel my abs, in the stretch position, that sort of thing. But I also put my feet, which I do with a lot of things that I lie down on my back, whether it's lying tricep extensions, dumbbell presses, that sort of thing. I put my feet up on a bench.
Interesting. I'm not a fan of that.
And I don't, let me be very clear, because there is one thing that I think is important about this that I'm not being clear on. I don't typically, on the dumbbell press, I don't have my feet touching the bench. I hold them up like I'm doing a crunch, similar to that. And it's funny because I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I do want to make this point just so that, because this is going to be a great topic for another show. But I do it for balance. What it does is it makes me control and stay within a weight range for my dumbbell presses that are even left to right. So as an example, if I can do, 110s and I have a lot of control and they're at a good rep tempo, and I can have my feet up and not feel like I'm going to fall off the bench or that it's wobbly, I'm better off with that than I am having my feet on the floor as a base and trying to press 120s or 130s that feel like they don't look like that, but they feel like I'm, doing this during the movement. I am after, especially these days, fluidity. I want things to feel even left to right and be able to work the muscle as hard as possible without necessarily going, I just need to train as heavy as I can. So I apologize for the rabbit hole that way, but I did want to explain that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I do think I would start with your sternum upright, because if your sternum collapses, you will get less pec recruitment, right? And then in fact, that actually spurred my memory. The rear delt with surface EMG studies was pretty damn active on a pullover, which is interesting. And again, it shows like they're not the end all be all. And then typically for upper back, Terry's I would consider part of the upper back, a more upright sternum when you're doing your pull downs versus lat, right? You actually want a little bit of a flexed lower back to fully lengthen the lat. So I would say most likely start with, and I'm recanting a little bit what I said before, start maybe a little bit more of a low back arch sternum upright, and then play around with what feels best for you. Because again, your rib cage is going to be different. Your bony structure is going to be different. Your and mine is different versus somebody else's. Sure. So there's going to have to be a little bit of experimentation. That's why I don't like protocols. I like systems and like general thought processes, because it's never going to be cookie cutter.
Sure. And let me add one more thing that I don't want to forget about how I do this dumbbell press. And some people do it this way. They may lock and hold the dumbbell this way. One of the reasons I don't do that, I hold on to the dumbbell.
Do the old
itself.
school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of that reason is because I often wonder if people aren't literally isometrically smashing their pecs together as they're doing the pullover. And I don't want to do that. I want to leave my pecs out of the movement as much as possible, even though you clearly can't completely remove them. That's just not the way our muscular system works.
Yeah.
But try to get them out as much as possible. So that grip is not only more comfortable, I think, and easier on the tricep, but it also tends to, for me, take a little bit more of the pec out of the movement. Let me ask you this, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but let's relate this and everything we're talking about with the dumbbell pullover versus a really good machine pullover like a Nautilus or a hammer strength. And when I say hammer strength, I have to differentiate between the crappy one that doesn't have the step, which is bizarre to me, but nonetheless,
why?
I think it's liability. I think someone who doesn't know what they're doing could get stuck in the machine and be screaming, and then the gym is going to get sued, and hammer strength is going to get sued because everybody sues everybody these days. But the hammer strength with the step. So a Nautilus, to me, is a great pullover if you can find one. And then, of course, the hammer strength with the step. How do you compare them? Is it essential? Are there a lot of parallels, do you think, from a mechanical standpoint?
I think the machine's better because of the constant tension. Because remember, the lat really kicks in once you're below 90. Well, with a dumbbell and weight, you don't have it. So I think a machine pullover is superior, personally. I don't think it's like some guys claiming pullover is like the best back movement of all time. Absolutely not.
Yeah, I wouldn't make that claim.
No.
I do think it's underrated.
But I do like it, and it's unfortunate not a lot of gyms have pullover machines.
True.
So, but yeah, if you can't, so if you don't have a pullover machine, I personally would choose a cable, and in a little bit, I'll show you how we do it. Or you add a band a la John Meadows style, if you want a little bit more back, because, if gravity's pulling straight down, well, as I keep getting the dumbbell towards my hips, well, there's not a lot of tension on the lat in that range of motion. Yep.
Could it be argued then that while doing the dumbbell pullover, that you do partials in the sense that you leave out maybe the top 1/4 or 1/3 of the movement and stay in a stretched position, much how some people will recommend doing dumbbell flies, which is funny because I'm so narrow shouldered that I can actually keep a contraction at the top of a dumbbell fly.
Yeah. So you're saying the overhead stretch position or down below?
The overhead stretch position, and then maybe only coming up into here and not going full over to. And I don't want to say rest because you shouldn't be resting there anyway. No. One of the things I do in that top position is I literally every single rep force my scapula open so that I know that my scapula are protracted at the beginning that movement to come down. Because I'm narrow shouldered and because I don't have a lot of range of motion for my scapula, they don't move very much.
Yeah.
I think that has been really important for the dumbbell pullover to be more effective for me versus when I did not do that. And I think it's important to talk about the protraction and retraction. So let me posit this and you tell me, shoot me down or tell me if this is correct. If you're going to do the dumbbell pullover with the shoulders retracted the entire time, I think you're getting a lot more chest out that deal. Is that am I right or wrong?
Then the rhomboid is going to be involved. The research shows that pullovers are almost a pure shoulder motion. There's not a lot of protraction, retraction, right? Because it's just a weird position to be in. And yeah, I do think if I am forcefully retracting the whole time, one, your range of motion, you're not going to get in as big of a stretch position.
Right.
So that's a strike against it, right? Because you want to do the range of motion you can control. This is a lengthened position movement for the most part. And then that's also going to probably actually reduce, your upper back recruitment. That's me speculating. But typically we find this is essentially a shoulder extension motion purely at this joint. We call it your GH joint for short. There's not that scapulothoracic shoulder blade against the rib cage joint we talked about last time. That's massively important for other stuff. So for you being so narrow shouldered, being protracted makes a hell of a lot more sense for me to at least give you more of a sensation of the back engaging than retracting. Yep.
And I would agree. There would be more lat involvement on the dumbbell pullover because the range of motion is so much more dramatic, quite frankly. I mean, if you're going to pull the bar all the way into your stomach, that's tough. I used to stay in only the stretch position on the pullover, and then it took me a couple of years to figure out, maybe I'm leaving a lot on the table with this and treating this machine pullover too much like it's a dumbbell pullover. And when I changed that, I thought, wow, that's odd. I am stronger in the stretch position than I am in the contracted position. Woo.
Yep. And then where people go wrong is as they get failure, they will start to collapse down and shrug up. So always shoulders down, no shrugging, sternum upright, especially on a machine pullover. And hopefully the machine pullover has a seatbelt because it's one of the few times I think a seatbelt is incredibly effective of helping you maintain proper biomechanics. Because I've gone to where there's no seatbelt and there's no foot pedal. Have you ever trained before you made this piece of equipment?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And I think too, is it not counterintuitive to say that as soon as you aren't keeping your scapula low, the lats are you're by shrugging up or letting your chest collapse,
using your upper back to do a hell of a lot more work.
You're literally removing the lats from a movement that you would arguably specifically be doing over the dumbbell pullover version to increase the lat involvement in that movement. So it's so counterintuitive.
Correct. Yeah, I still would classify it mainly as a Terry's movement, but 100% agree with that statement.
I think one of the biggest points you made in this discussion is the fact that the Terry's muscle has the potential to be very large, and you will see it in very large individuals.
Yes.
The rest of us, those muscles aren't that big, so you tend to think, they're not that big. The lats are so much bigger because of surface area, when in reality,
but in reality, the lat is paper thin, and even when it's well developed, it's still only a couple inches. A Terry's Kid B, when I palpate, okay, here's my hands, not the smallest hands in the world, not the biggest hands in the world. I'll have a teres be at least 4 inches wide when I'm doing manual therapy on a lifter. Like that's a big freaking muscle that we don't think about because it gets lumped in with the lat, right? It's the lat's helper.
Well, I think we lump everything in, which we shouldn't, but everything when we say back. That's why I think it was important.
Now, if you want
differentiate
specific pullover that's even more isolating to the teres, I learned this from Coach Cassim. He had Dr. Pat Davidson doing it, where he's doing a side pull down in this range of motion called scaption. So you're on a side bench and then you're pulling down like that. That'll really eliminate pec recruitment and get a lot more teres. I've never personally done it because my teres is already very well developed, but that would even isolate things even further.
Okay. Now, what about this cable pullover? Are you able to bring that up on the screen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So let me show John Meadows' banded version just in case people aren't.
Which is a great movement, but you're right. From a practical standpoint,
it's a pain in the ass to set
and it
up.
makes it a pain in the ass for everybody around you in the gym because I am sorry. Number one, I'm too OCD because it has to be even. So that pull on that band needs to be not pulling on the left side more than the right. So whatever you're attaching it to needs to be right behind you. I like what he's doing there. That would work. Yeah. That would work
with a training partner. Way easier.
Like that idea.
Yeah, because then you have to move the bench. Oh, that's not right. So having a training partner makes life way easier. You could see though his sternum is upright with an arch in his back. So that would be a lot of his elbows are a little flared, but I guarantee you he's getting a lot of back recruitment because also look how he's handling it, just like what you talked about.
And arguably, if he had his feet up, he might just slide back on that.
Yeah. For the most part, I am not a fan of feet up because you're less stable, but for you, it works.
Yeah. Well, and that's the reason I use it.
Yeah.
I understand that it's less stable, no question, but that's part of the reason I'm using it so that balance and that coordination is there. So, because again, I'm in the minority here. I'm so OCD. I need things to feel the same left to right. I will do cable flies and I will look up for every rep in the stretch position to see if one is lower than the other. It's just something that I've always done. My editor guy busted me when I sent him a video of me doing that exercise, and he's like, nobody wants to watch you look up every single rep in the stretch position. Like, it's not about them. I'm executing them the way that I always execute.
They get what they get.
Right.
So here, you could also do these seated. So when people have a low back injury, I didn't pull up that video, but you're essentially doing it seated with that low back chair that everybody overhead presses with.
Okay.
But here's what I like is by adding a rocking motion, you're changing the resistance profile.
Okay.
So for one, use 2 ropes or a super wide handle so you could actually get your hands by your side, right? Because the lat's active range is about 120 degrees of shoulder flexion to your elbow by your side. The teres is similar, right? So when you only lean forward, you're emphasizing the lengthened position. When you're only upright, you're emphasizing the shortened position. By adding a rocking motion, you're able to blend both. So this is a variation I don't see a lot of people doing that I am a huge, huge fan of. It's murder. You're staying in the active range. And so I think this is a lot more back than pec versus the traditional dumbbell pullover. The rocking is way harder, as you could see, right? And then this is probably going too heavy this day I did it. But I like this version because you're really challenging it. But guess what? You could also do them on an inclined bench with the reaching behind you for the cable. You could do them standing, leaning forward, standing upright, right? Like that last rep, I wouldn't have counted in my logbook. I would have said I struggled to get it.
Right.
So you could do different variations on different days, but that's one when people have a hard time connecting to their back. I will program that early.
Yeah, I can see that as an opener. I can see that as an opener.
I use that version to kind of get everything going and warmed up. Plus, that's a lot of lubrication in the shoulder, so your range of motion is going to be dramatically improved as well. So I agree with you. I would do more of the cable like that as an opener, and then the dumbbell more as a quote unquote finisher.
You know what threw me?
Typically, I would do it. Yeah,
I didn't know what you were doing because when you said a cable pullover, I was thinking you were going to do it from a bench, and I was thinking, how is he going to keep that range of motion from a bench?
So you can. Let me pull something up
because I know that movement is a stiff arm lat pull down, only because back in the day, and you'd have to be really old school and have to be like a diehard old head to remember this, but Andres Kaling, the guy who owns the posing trunk, and I think he did what were the first Velcro lifting belts? They were in the late 80s because they were like bright pink and everything else. I think it started with a V.
I think so. Yeah.
It was.
Yep.
Anyway, he was in one of the muscle magazines, probably Muscle Fitness or Flex, and he did the stiff arm lat pull down. When the name of the article was "Attack Your Back Like a Viking," and I remember it was one of those issues that I read cover to cover while I was supposed to be in class in high school, and I did that exercise religiously. Yeah.
So you can, let me do this one more time. So I still classify it as a straight on pull down, but I believe that would be I still think that's superior to a dump. Exactly. Yeah. But then here's John doing it on a flat bed. You could still do it. He's doing a band, but you could do a cable, or you could have a incline bench facing away from it, grabbing the ropes and pulling down in front of you. That's another version. So there's all these different versions. So guess what? You have the flexibility to play around and see what motion feels the best for me, or you could rotate through exercises over the course of the year to keep things fresh. It's the same movement, but it's slightly different, because I'm a big believer of having at least 2 different rotations of workouts, especially progressive overload folks, to reduce wear and tear of the same movement pattern, both joint wise, neurologically. Plus, are you going to be able to progress on a hack squat 8 weeks in a row? Probably not. But if I'm hitting the hack squat every other week, I probably can.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. And multi-angle joints, there's a million different angles that you can hit. So, if you're doing the same curl or the same tricep exercise week to week, I don't know that that'd be as big of a deal, but I don't know if I'd want to lock into the same movements for things like back.
What's one of the most complicated parts to train period is back, because you can't see it and we have a hard time connecting. So doing some sort of opener movement like a cable pullover, a banded pullover might actually benefit people to get blood into it. So when they do their rows, they might be able to feel a little bit more, right? Because most people say back's the most complicated because they don't understand elbow positioning, but you
even
can't
people
see
with
it.
Great back development. I would argue that really it's not only the most complicated muscle group or area of muscles to train, but it's the most misunderstood, because even people with great backs genetically, you can walk into any gym and 80%, maybe not 80%, but to make my point, 70-80% of people could train their back more effectively than they're training it, no matter their development at that point.
Correct. Yep. Completely agree.
Very cool. Very cool. Can we touch on the rotator cuff muscle involvement in the pullover? Is there anything there that is substantial, that this is highly beneficial? I'm just making up words. I write so I can make up words. Apparently.
Well, your subscap, which is the primary stabilizer when you pull, we talked about infraspinatus being the primary stabilizer when you press. That's going to be getting a pretty wicked stretch from being overhead. So making sure that has the ability to move would be super helpful.
Which one is getting the most stretch?
It's called your subscapularis. It's on the inside of your shoulder blade. It's your main internal rotator. That's going to get really stretched overhead. That's the one that if you have a hard time with a lat spread or a double back flaring the lat, that subscap, I guarantee you, is bound up. And so, in fact, we'll edit out this part. I did not. Give me 1 second.
I want to make sure if there's anything else that you want to touch on with the pullover movement or the involvement of the muscles of the shoulder complex, the rotator cuffs, or even the back.
So this would be very helpful to get the subscap to self-release, to get overhead. So this will help you get into the behind the neck press we're going to retouch on next. This would help you with lat posing. This would help you get better overhead range of motion for a lat pull down. So this would be an incredible movement to add to do some self-release before warming up, because that muscle, the subscap, is going to be limiting your overhead motion. So this is just a bar for my cable machine in the office. You could use a broom, a dowel, use a towel, and you're going to dig right inside pretty much the middle of your shoulder blade to get the muscle called your subscap. And then she's just going to pin it and then drag it up like that. So it's doing like manual therapy, pin and stretch that on your own. So I'll show it one more time.
That can't
this
be
is
fun. That can't
massive.
Feel good.
What's up?
That can't feel good. That can't be fun.
Oh, no, it's not very comfortable. But man, you do 10 passes of that and I'm just kind of scrolling through it, that'll dramatically change your lat spread position, your overhead position. A lot of times people with front of the shoulder plane, if they have bicep issues, yes, the infraspinatus kid refer there, but the subscap will tighten up trying to stabilize the shoulder. So that in theory will take away some of the front of the shoulder pain we have in the gym. So doing a little bit of self tissue release before you do those movements or even before posing is a game changer.
Nice. All right, this is where I segue into the follow-up session then, right? Or the follow-up section, follow-up topic. Now, I did not touch on this when we opened because I was scattered, and it's episode 2, so I need to get better at this, which I will. But what we're going to do every show is we're going to have a follow-up area or follow-up section after the main topic to go back to the last episode and either add information or to respond to questions or comments in the comments section based on that topic that we discussed. And the last topic we discussed was the press behind neck. We spoke a lot about the rotator cuff muscles, whether the press behind neck is a good exercise. It is for some, it may not be for others based on range of motion through the shoulder, things like that. So what do you want to throw at me as far as following up on the press behind neck topic?
So the main thing is I outlined why it's not a great movement for a lot of people. So I fearmongered and I didn't give any solutions. So let's give the listeners solutions.
Fair enough.
Right? Because you've even noticed if you haven't done it in a while, it takes you a couple of weeks to get back into it. Sure. So what if somebody does not have that range of motion? This would be a very helpful warm-up for any sort of upper body day. Some of these are the same movements I use to help, my 400, 500 pound strongmen be able to get a bar on their back. So it'll travel to that as well. So I'm going to highlight what I teach people in office as a specific warm-up mobility routine to get in better overhead positions, but this would apply to all pressing motions. This would still be really helpful on back day. I might tweak it slightly, but it'll give you a big idea. So you can do the subscap self-release that I just showed, right? I would do that first. Then we're going to start with a breathing drill. I will show everything on screen in a second. I'm going to try and make this as easy as possible. I'm going super 10,000 square foot view. We're going to do a breathing drill first in order to start to get part of this upper back rib cage to expand, right? Because if it's compressed right there, my shoulder blade motion will be different than if it's expanded. Mm-hmm. So how this works, and I learned this from a guy named Zach Couples, is, we're going to use fluid dynamics and air to expand part of the rib cage. So when my arm is in this position, this is pressuring the system. So it's like concentric there. The backside's eccentric. So that's where I'm expanding. As I go up, it changes where the expansion of the rib cage happens, right? So based on different findings of what your shoulder range of motion will dictate which level of the rib cage we want to breathe on. So that's why we're doing the breathing drill. And then every time with patients or people or online, check your range of motion, do the breathing drill, recheck. Because I don't show somebody they gain 10, 15, 20 degrees. They're never going to do it because you don't feel anything happening, right? So self-release first, and then this would be a generic, this is not individualized, but this would probably get 95% of people in a much better position. I'm going to pull up videos.
And while you're doing that, let me point out that exactly what you're talking about are the movements that I do with my DPT while cupping.
Awesome.
Cupping with motion. And I got to tell you, it's night and day. Let me add this. I hate cupping with motion.
Yeah, it's not pleasant.
No, it's not. Yep. I put it right up there with manual trigger point.
Yep.
Point work. It is not fun. But it is, the finish line is, the end result is incredible. So I tolerate it because it's so incredibly beneficial.
All right, so we're going to run through these very quickly.
Okay.
Here's just to show people before and after. So I'm going to quickly check how does his shoulder move. So that's his ability to externally rotate. That's his ability to internally rotate. So you can see he's lacking external rotation. Behind the neck press is going to be largely external rotation. So he's going to stand next against a wall. Ideally, something is being squeezed between your legs. If you don't have it, no big deal. Use a water bottle, whatever. Your lower back and lower ribs are going to be against the wall. He's going to reach his arms at a 45-degree angle, right? I'm making sure his low back is against the wall. He's going to round his upper back, and then he's going to actively reach his hands away from him to prevent him from shrugging up. Then he's going to breathe in through his nose, out through pursed lips like he's blowing out birthday candles, visualizing breathing into the ribs that are just off of the wall, right? So he's going to do that for 10 breaths. So this would be a generic breathing drill for external rotation. And then now, so he'd do 10 breaths, right? And then he's going to come back. This is from something called PRI. See, now you can see the range of motion difference already,
it's so
right?
simple too. It's so simple to do. So if anybody's looking at this going, breathe in, do this. It's simple.
Look at the difference he just got.
Sure.
Like now he has the mobility. Okay. So you would self-release first. This would help with, what would you think? A double back bicep. Like
sure.
You could breathe backstage to change your rib cage to improve posing. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that would be step one. Then after that, you've got a couple options. Typically what I like to do is work inside out. So the next thing we would do is, this is my favorite drill for teaching upper back extension. So I use this when I was at the powerlifting meet helping out this weekend. Mm-hmm. Everybody who came to me did this before bench. So you could use a cable or a band, right? It's looped over your arm. You're holding on the same side. She's going to keep her hips forward, but turn her shoulder to the side the band's anchored. She's going to stand up and practice retracting that same side shoulder blade, the left side shoulder blade, into her back pocket. So she is absolutely smoking her upper back, getting into her at a back extended position. So remember, any sort of pressing to get full shoulder retraction, you need to extend the mid back. So this will help also teach upper back tightness in deadlifts and squats, but we're using that specifically to teach upper back extension so the shoulder blades can get in a better position.
I like that one, back pocket cue. That's
correct. Yeah.
That's a good takeaway right there.
Yep. Okay. Then I typically will do this first, which I did on BSG. So serratus anterior, nobody ever trains that. You could use a pillowcase. If you don't have booty bands, you could double up resistance band. I am protracting my shoulders wide, keeping them there wide, and working my way up without letting my shoulders shrug up. So what is this? This is a lat spread under tension.
That's awesome. And again, very simple. Can I say this? And again, shoot me down if you don't agree with this. Yep. Let's just say you're looking at it, you're going, oh man, I don't want to do all three of those exercises every time I go in. That doesn't. Do one. Change it every time you go in then. Because one is going to be, three arguably would be better because I'm going to do them all. Yep. But one is going to be better than none.
So I'm going to challenge people and say, if you don't have time for 8 minutes to warm your body up to get in a better position and you don't have the mobility to get behind the neck press, just don't do it, because otherwise the risk for injury is pretty significant. And so it's not 30 minutes, it's 5 to 10 minutes. I will have people time themselves. You give me 5 to 10 minutes. With how beat up I am, how long I've been doing this, I will take off 1 or 2 work sets at the end of my workout to go into a training session ready to go. Now, younger folks, that's nails on a chalkboard. They're telling us to fuck off, you old guys. But trust me, as you accrue some mileage with training age, you're going to want to help it. So I would say the breathing drill is mandatory. If you're only going to do 2, I would do the breathing drill and either this one or this next one. So I'm only going to ask you to do 2.
Okay.
Here's the other one I showed. This is my favorite drill of all time for pressing because it's getting you internal rotation, but it's also training his infraspinatus, so the biggest bang for your buck humanly possible. So at powerlifting meets, I have them do, I helped several people on bench. They all came back, said they set lifetime PRs. They're doing the work. I'm just a small piece, I don't even know these people, but they're doing that back banded extension, and they're doing this and then one other movement before bench, and every single person set lifetime PRs.
Nice.
Could be a coincidence. Could not be.
It's okay. Leave it on if you don't want to do it, leave it on the table then, I guess, right?
Exactly.
I mean, whatever.
Yep. So what you're going to do is the band's above your elbow. Now, he was coming back from a gnarly shoulder labrum tear, so the band is a little bit directly above his elbow. It would be more challenging the lower the band gets. Your hands on the small of your back. He's still cheating and rotating through the torso slightly, but again, we were coming back from a major labral tear.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to try and lock your body in place. The band will pull you forward. Only go as far forward as is comfortable, because you are going to have a pinch in the front of the shoulder regardless if you're injured or not, because the shoulder capsule has to fold over. But the exercise isn't how far you could go forward. It's pulling it back and pausing, right? Mm-hmm. So people who don't have time, you're going to give me 10 breaths of that breathing drill and 1 or 2 sets of 10 reps here. A bonus one, this is the bonus one and this is the last one. A bonus one would be this. This is what I also had powerlifters do. So this is called a trap raise. It targets lower traps, which we typically don't do, right? So all it is an Olympic weight plate. She's squeezing her glutes. She's lifting all the way up over her head, right? And she's lean enough. She's a badass dragon boat racer, like world champion, gnarly. You could literally see her shoulder blades moving, which is really cool. That's why I picked this video. Mm-hmm. Why that matters, if you look at our human body, I don't know if we did this last time. I think this should be a recall. We have hooks on the shoulder blade, right? So 2 muscles run below it. Your supraspinatus, which is why that's the most commonly torn rotator cuff muscle, and your bicep tendon.
Maybe God watches the podcast right along with Jay Cutler, and he's taking notes right now too.
Yep.
He's like, that's a great point. I created you, Dr. Marv, and look at, you're helping me out.
Yep. So traps, deadlifts, any sort of row, any sort of carry, upper traps. Every single row that you have, maximal shoulder protraction, retraction is middle. We really don't train lower traps very often. Why? In order to prioritize that muscle fully, the upper arm needs to be parallel to these fibers, which is that overhead motion, which we don't do a ton. Why this matters for the pullover and the overhead press, if you see where it attaches there. So it's going to take those hooks that I showed earlier, and it's going to rotate them up. So the outer right side of the shoulder blade is moving up towards the neck, creating upward rotation, which will create space to not pinch this and increase overhead range of motion. So if you recall, right, here's the hook, it's rotating up. What did I say is the limiting factor for most pullovers? Upward rotation of the shoulder blade. Sure. What's the limiting factor behind the neck besides just flat out rib cage? Upward rotation of doing that. So that would be a very all-encompassing movement-specific warm-up that'll translate to a lot of other lifts, right? But those would be key point. I mean, you do that only as your upper body warm-up from here on out. I think you would be very pleasantly surprised with how much better you feel, how many fewer working sets it takes, warm-up sets to get going. And I think that would dramatically increase longevity, because this is the stuff I show people that I could get them back to training. And so that's your solution to start working on to get to a behind the neck press if you can already. Or like I said, that breathing drill. If you're, somebody who's having a hard time even getting a bar on your back, do that breathing drill, 2 or 3 sets of 10 reps. It'll help. That's usually a staple for that problem as well.
And let me add this. Is it possible then that what I feel through my mid to lower back isn't my erectors while I'm doing front lateral raises? It's a lower trap?
Yeah, so if you're doing, depending on how you're going, you are getting a little bit of lower trap. Yep,
yeah,
correct.
Okay, so if you are doing front lateral raises for shoulders, know that you are getting that lower trap involvement as well, because I used to think, I'm like, maybe that's my erectors, but that kind of all tied in when you explain that. So let me add this, and disagree with me if you do. We're providing information, we're providing opinions. If you don't want to do this stuff, if you think it's a waste of time, much like we were saying earlier, then just leave it on the table. But don't complain about scapula not opening up, that your back is not growing, that your shoulders aren't growing. Oh, I'm not going to do press behind neck because I just can't get into that movement, even though it would be maybe a very effective movement for me because my shoulders suck. Just don't go complaining to anybody, because we're providing some information here, valuable information, in my opinion, especially with the older demographic. I agree with you that the younger guys, I know I would have at 25. I'm like, I don't know if I have anything to learn here. The truth is I did. But it may have been something I was learning that I didn't need at that moment. Or arguably, if I started doing those things earlier, I may not have run into issues later on. So then the question begs the question, how long are you going to do what you're doing? How long are you going to train? How long are you going to bodybuild? How long are you going to be in pursuit of as much size or strength as you can? It's not that long, and you don't think that it matters, don't do it. But even if you don't think you do it and you stay with it, this is a game of longevity. It's not just about your health. It's also about the mobility. It's also about injury prevention. And you might regret that decision later on. But if you do dismiss it now and you need to come back to it later, you'll remember us telling you maybe it was something you should have considered.
I will challenge folks, if you do what I ask you to do before your workout and you don't notice a difference, never come back. Tell everybody I'm a charlatan.
Sure.
It still hasn't happened. If they actually do them, they do them correctly, because you will see a massive change in the movements you could get to, better biomechanical position. Like that alone will allow you to get in a probably couple, if you want, it's up to you, a couple more inches overhead safely with a pullover motion or behind the neck, right? You still don't force anything. Nothing is mandatory. That's the fun thing about hypertrophy. We're not power lifters where you have to do 3 movements. You could do whatever you want, find what works for you. But a little bit of prep work goes a long, long, long way, because you're not going to be Gumby forever. I hate to break it to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let me take us out on that note then. We'll be back every week. We're recording on Mondays, but we are going to be consistently putting out content each week. So on that note, Dr. Marv, where can people reach you if they have questions, if they want to contact you for training? How do they get a hold of you?
So easiest way is Instagram at dr.marvin.saysdc or my website, theeducatedmeathead.com. Just so folks know, I don't do one-on-one like Skip. Skip's your guy. I do consults. I have online programs. And then I also just launched my first ever course, which is bodybuilding anatomy and meathead biomechanics. So you can kind of just quickly learn everything we're going to touch on. But I'm too busy to do one-on-one where it would be egregiously expensive. I would defer to Skip. So Skip's your guy if you need the one-on-one stuff.
And I'm not egregiously expensive. I'm just slightly less than egregiously expensive. Yeah. But absolutely, if you need, or if you have any questions for me, if you want to reach out to me to discuss working with me, I am the OG. I've been around for 40 years, training for 40 years, started competing, 30 years ago. Feel free to reach out at Intense Muscle on Instagram, or you can email me.
People were telegraphing you money. People were telegraphing you money.
Exactly. Where can I send this guy money? I don't even care what it costs. I'm just going to send him money. But until the next episode of Between Two Dumbbells, and I want to point out that we are not the dumbbell. The dumbbells are on the side. It's what goes on between those dumbbells and what. Think about it. You're holding dumbbells, Marv. What's in between those dumbbells? Your brain. Yep. So it's between two dumbbells. It's not Dr. Marv and it's not Skip. We're going to hear it in the comment section. Yep. If anybody disagrees, we're going to hear that. Well, this makes sense. It's a couple of dumbbells talking about things that don't make any sense. And that's YouTube. It is what it is. So let us know what you think in the comments. Do us a favor. If you like the episode, ring the bell, like us, share us, slam us in the comment section. I'm good for it. I'm from the message boards. It is what it is. I got thick skin. Until the next episode, we're out. This is the part where I struggle. Just check us out on the next episode.
There we go. Perfect.